What is going on, you guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today's video, I'm feeling determined, so we're gonna figure this thing out. A lot of you guys that have been watching the videos already know what's going on with this thing. We got a cylinder 1 misfire, and I cannot figure it out to save the life of me. So, since there's been so many freaking comments suggesting all these different things, I am gonna rule all of these out for you right now. We're gonna go over everything that I have tested so far, just to make this easy and just kind of knock those all out of the way, just so that I don't keep getting suggestions on stuff that I have already done. But I'm confident we're gonna figure this out. So the issue that I'm having right now is when cruising at 2500 RPM only on the highway in 6th gear, I get a cylinder 1 misfire, and it will count up to like a 10 or 11, then go off. And I've been dealing with this issue for basically a year since we got the car tuned on the dyno. And last summer, when I started tearing the car down again, trying to figure out this issue, I found that the signal positive wire on the cylinder 1 injector was frayed. So I pulled my harness apart, resoldered the wire, got the car all back together, we went for a cruise again, and it's still there. But this time we went to the track, as you guys saw in last video, which if you didn't, I'll put a link up top to that right now. At the track was the first time it ever misfired at idle, and it was misfiring like crazy at idle. I was sitting in line waiting to get into the track, and honestly, it was like the worst timing ever. Super embarrassing when there's millions of people around you. Well, not millions, but like hundreds of people around you, and they just hear the car just going do 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 do. Makes you look pretty bad. So now that you guys know the whole backstory on this, let's start going over absolutely everything I have tested to this point, which is all the basics. Number one, first thing we started with was moving coils around. So I moved the cylinder 1 ignition coil to cylinder 3 and moved the cylinder 3 ignition coil to cylinder 1 to see if the misfire would follow that ignition coil to cylinder 3, and it did not. Then, since it didn't follow the ignition coil, I was like, okay, let's pull the spark plugs, check the gap on them, and if the gap's good, maybe move them around and see what happens. So I pulled the spark plugs, looked at them, and all 4 spark plug gaps were the same. I can't remember what they were. I did this like 6 months ago, so I don't really remember, but just being extra cautious, seeing if it would follow, I moved the spark plug on cylinder 1 to cylinder 3, hoping it would follow, and it didn't. There we go, boom. 2 birds, 1 stone. Spark plugs, not the problem. Ignition coils, not the problem. So I'm thinking if it's not spark, it's got to be a fuel issue. So I have Cobb 1300cc injectors and radium fuel rails with the radium parallel fuel plumbing kit, which has the dead end caps on the front side of the rails. So first thing I did, if it wasn't an ignition coil, it was a spark plug, I moved the cylinder 1 injector to cylinder 3 and moved the cylinder 3 injector to cylinder 1, and still misfired on cylinder 1. So now it's not the injector, it's not the ignition coil, and it's not the spark plug. It's 3 issues ruled out right there. Next thing I started to think was, okay, maybe since we have this deadhead radium fuel system, maybe since cylinder 1 is the furthest cylinder away in this fuel setup, maybe there's some water hammer effect going on in the rail or something like that that's causing cylinder 1 to receive not as much fuel. So what I did was, since my fuel line comes in at the back of the rail at cylinder 3, I took the fuel line, moved it to come in at cylinder 1, and it deadheaded at cylinder 3, and the misfire still stayed on cylinder 1. So here we go. What is that? 4 things now? It's not the ignition coil, it's not an injector issue, it's not a spark plug issue, and it's not the fuel plumbing. So now where do we go? Make sure the engine is healthy. So I did a compression test, and my compression tester is messed up. It's just like a cheap Princess Auto compression tester. If you guys are from Canada, you would know Princess Auto stuff's not the best, but it does give you a gauge on if all the cylinders are even. So I did a compression test, and it read 100 PSI on all 4 cylinders. I actually did that compression test in the first video where I was trying to figure this misfire out. So if you guys did not see that, I will put a link up top here. So it read 100 PSI on all 4 cylinders. And that indicates that there is not a problem on that cylinder because they're all even. So then off camera, I was thinking, okay, compression test is even on all 4, but let's do a leak down test to make sure these valves are sealing. Crank that piston to top dead center, did a leak down test, and I had the same leak down on all 4 cylinders. So now we know it shouldn't be an internal issue. So I started thinking, maybe it's an electrical issue. And that's when I found my frayed injector wire on cylinder 1. Then we drove the car, and still nothing changed. The misfire is still there. So where I'm at now is I still want to make sure everything electrical is good on this thing. I saw a lot of you guys comment about checking the harness, which is smart, and that is what we are going to do first. I'm kind of all over the place here, but I actually forgot to mention one thing. Once I did all that stuff and I still couldn't figure out the misfire, I thought it had to be in the tune. There was something wrong with the tuning strategy that Matt put into the ECU. So I had him send me a bunch of revisions. We played with a whole bunch of stuff, and we actually found when he dialed the AFR richer, so cruising at like a high 13, low 14 AFR. The Misfire actually was less, if that makes sense. It didn't come as often. Instead of getting like 15 Misfire counts at once, I would only get like 2 to 3 or 4. So I was thinking, okay, now we're getting somewhere. If you're dialing the AFR richer and the Misfire's coming less, clearly this is a lean Misfire on cylinder 1, but why would it be on cylinder 1 and not any of the other cylinders? That's what I'm kind of sussing out here. But just to rule absolutely everything out here, we are going to test the entire electrical circuit on cylinder 1. So the wires from the main harness plug to the injector and the wires from the main harness plug to the ignition coil. And I have 2 wiring diagrams here printed out just for that. This one here, as you can see, is for the fuel injectors. It has a pinout diagram of the main connector harness, and it shows here that the main injector relay feeds power through the main connector at pin 48, and it supplies power to all 4 injectors sharing the same circuit. Then each injector is ground controlled by the ECU and has its own ground wire to the ECU. So we should be able to apply this to the harness that is in the car. So I want to test the injector wires first. So we are just going to get this cylinder 1 injector unplugged, and then I got to reach down there and unplug my main engine harness. Okay, so we got everything taken out here. I have the main harness disconnected so we can test pins here. And I have the injector harnesses unplugged. This one is cylinder 3 and this one is cylinder 1. These are the stupid connectors that Cobb and ID makes you use for their injectors on Subaru connectors. And this is one thing that sussed me out, was the little pins in here sit so damn loose. You guys aren't gonna be able to see this, but you can literally grab those pins and move them with your fingernails. The reason I pulled the cylinder 3 one is because I wanted to see if the pins were loose on that one too, and they are just as loose as this one, and cylinder 3 is not misfiring. So we are going to test the resistance from the main harness to the cylinder 1 injector connector. We're going to test the signal positive wire, and we are also going to test the negative wire, because the negative wire goes back through this main connector to the ECU, and the positive wire comes into the connector here from the main relay, comes in, and then goes straight to the injector. So there should be a ground and a positive wire from here to the injector according to the wiring diagram that I have. I got my good old trusty multimeter here where we can test resistance in ohms. So I'm gonna go through this wiring diagram right now. First wire I'm gonna test is the positive wire. So we are gonna test pin number 2 on the injector to pin number 48 on that main harness connector. And if I look at this little B21 connector here, I can find pin number 48, which is right there. So let's get to testing that real quick, and then I will show you guys once I have it all set up. Wait a minute, this diagram's flipped. You gotta be kidding me. There's no frickin' way, dude. Do we just have a damn scientific breakthrough here? What just happened? Okay, I think I might have found the problem, but I'm so confused right now. I don't even know how the car was running. So I pulled all of the Cobb extension harnesses off just to test this for testing purposes. So I could see the color of the wire on the back of the injector harness, the black versus the colored wire for negative and positive. And turns out the black wires in these injector wires are actually the positives, and the colored wires are the negatives that ground to the ECU. And right now, if I'm right here, I have the signal negative wires to the ECU flipped on cylinder 1 and 3. How does that even happen? If I go by this diagram, absolutely everything is wrong on it. But if I flip the diagram over, everything is spot on except for the 1 and 3 signal negative wires are flipped. There's no way I'm gonna be able to explain this to you guys, but if you guys are interested to actually figure this issue out with me, you guys are gonna wanna watch this. But it's gonna be very boring and complicated, but you might learn something. So I wrote down all of the pin locations on what they're supposed to be as per this diagram in this column right here. Cylinder 1, pin 54 should go to pin 1, pin 48 should be pin 2, and pin 48 should be pin 2 for every single cylinder. On cylinder 2, pin 53 should go to pin 1, on cylinder 3, pin 52 should go to pin 1, and on cylinder 4, pin 51 should go to pin 1. So going by this diagram, if I look at this connector view exactly the way that it shows here and compare it directly to the factory connector, pin 48 is on the far left on the bottom there, and it counts up to pin 54 on the far right. And I'll just give you guys a quick visual in the engine bay here. Like I said, this very bottom row, pin 48 all the way on the far left, all the way to pin 54 on the far right, all in this bottom row. Now, I checked every single wire on this car, and on every single one, pin 54 went to pin 1, whereas it was supposed to be pin 48 on pin 2. As you can see, pin 2 is supposed to be the signal positive wire that gets power from the main relay. But I think this diagram is flipped. And hear me out here. If you flip this diagram over, looking at the connector view in the car, pin 54 is on the right side. If you flip this diagram over, pin 48 is now on the right side. So when I was measuring, pin 54 went to pin 1, but in actuality, it's pin 48 going to pin 2 if you flip this diagram. And if you flip this diagram and you test in the car pin 48 with it flipped, you have 1.3 ohms of resistance to pin 2 on cylinder 1 and all of the other cylinders. So here's my thought process here. On this diagram, cylinder 3 showed pin 48 going to pin 2. But if you flip the diagram, that is pin 54 going to pin 1. And if you look at the diagram for cylinder 3 pin 1 should be going to pin 52, which is right there. But if you flip the diagram, pin 50, which is cylinder 1, is the third one over from the left. But if you flip this on over, pin 52 is the third one from the left. Now that we realize with this diagram flipped that the cylinder 1 and 3 signal negative wires are flipped with each other, just to prove my point, let's go on to cylinder 2 and 4. So cylinder 2, again, pin 54 went to pin 1 with the diagram straight. But if you flip it, that was pin 48 to pin 2, which over here is exactly what it's supposed to be. With the diagram normal, cylinder 2 was pin 49 to pin 2. And cylinder 2 is supposed to be pin 53 to pin 1. But in actuality, since it's flipped, that pin 1 is pin 2. This is so freaking confusing. But pin 53 is the second from the right with the diagram straight. You flip this diagram over, it is now second from the left. But it's still pin 53, so I guess in this case it doesn't really matter. Because if you look, cylinder 2, pin 53 should be going to pin 1. So that is spot on with the diagram flipped. Now we go to cylinder 4. Pin 51 should go to pin 1. On here I have pin 51 going to pin 2 because it's flipped, which is perfect because pin 51 is 1, 2, 3, 4 over from both sides. It's dead centered. So if you flip the diagram there, it doesn't really matter. So if we flip to the back of this sheet of paper here, you will see that my cylinder 1 and 3 signal negative wires are flipped. So on this page here, I wrote out what I actually have if this diagram is flipped. I have cylinder 1, pin 48 to pin 2, which if you look on this side is exactly what the diagram shows. Pin 48 straight to pin 2 on the cylinder 1 injector. Now let's look at pin number 1. When I'm testing, pin 1 is going to pin 52 on the cylinder 1 injector, which is wrong because the cylinder 1 injector should be going to pin 54 on the signal negative wire. And if you look at cylinder 3, the cylinder 3 negative wire from pin number 1 should be going to pin number 52. So just going over all of my measurements on the back here, pin 48 to pin 2, pin 48 to pin 2, pin 48 to pin 2, and pin 48 to pin 2 again, which is perfect. And that's exactly what the diagram shows, that pin 48 goes to pin 2 on every single injector. So that's perfect. Now cylinder 1 negative is supposed to be going to pin 54. Cylinder 3 negative is supposed to be going to pin 52. Cylinder 2 negative is going to pin 53, which if you look at the diagram here is perfect because the cylinder 2 negative wire there goes right to pin 53. And cylinder number 4, pin 51, goes to pin 1. And if you look at the diagram here, pin 1 on cylinder 4 injector goes to pin 51. That was probably insanely confusing, and I was confused at the start too. That time lapse is like an hour of me testing these wires because I was just blown away that this could even happen if it happened. And I'm right that that diagram's flipped, because if that diagram's not flipped, none of the pin locations make sense whatsoever. The only way they make sense is if it's flipped. So I have an idea that we're gonna try. This still doesn't make sense to me why it wouldn't misfire on cylinder 3 as well if they're flipped, but I don't know what goes on inside of an ECU ECU. It's kind of like magic that goes on in there. All I can control is what goes on outside of the ECU with the wiring. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna de-pin the cylinder 1 and 3 injector harnesses. I'm gonna install the pins from those injector harnesses flipped, and then we're gonna take the car for a little rep, because I think the car is gonna run like shit if that doesn't work. So as soon as we fire it up, we'll find out. If it runs good when we fire it up, I'm gonna take it for a spin just with those injector wires set up the way I just explained, and we'll see what happens. If this is actually the problem, and I just figured it out like that, I'm a freaking genius, and you guys should all subscribe right now. If I'm wrong, well then that sucks. So as you can see, we got the wire coming out of the cylinder 3 harness going into the cylinder 1 injector, and then the harness out of the cylinder 1 injector, which is that white wire, going into the cylinder 3 injector. I got everything plugged back in. So now I'm gonna fire this thing up and let's see what happens, boys. Please work. I thought it would be misfiring or something with those clips if they were wrong, but it's running fine, so this might be our problem. Right now at idle, I'm monitoring roughness on all 4 cylinders and knock on cylinder 1, and there is nothing on all 4 at startup. So let's take this thing for a little cruise and see what happens. Okay, so I'm just going 10 kilometers an hour here down my gravel road, and check engine light came on, but I have no misfires whatsoever on any cylinder yet, and my check engine code actually is not for an injector issue. It is giving me a P2092, which is a intake cam position actuator 2, left-hand side, control circuit low. I double checked that cam sensor on that side and it is plugged in. I did have to reef on it a little bit to get the 1 injector wire out, so I might have pulled one of the pins back a little bit or something like that on that connector. I'll double check that when I get back. But for now, I just want to get on the highway and take this thing for a cruise and see if that cylinder 1 misfire is gone. Every time you fix one freaking issue, another one just shows up. Okay. We are currently cruising almost 100 kilometers an hour, and look at those misfire counts, baby. Absolutely 0 on all 4 cylinders. I'm not gonna kid myself here though, because last time we took it out for a first rip, it did misfire for the first little while. So I'm gonna go beat on it a little bit, get her nice and hot, and then we'll see if that misfire comes back. Nope, it did not like that. There's no misfire, but that was definitely a cam sensor issue. That felt like it threw timing hard. I think we fixed our misfire issue, but we caused ourselves another issue. All right, I posted on my story that I figured it out, and Ethan just messaged me. He said, yeah, you have to tell me now. So I'm gonna call him, see what he thinks. That was our issue, 100%, that's it.
Yes.
Hello?
Hello.
Guess what?
You fixed it?
Yeah.
You're kidding.
No, I figured it out.
What was it?
I'm an idiot.
No.
Yeah.
Of course, it had to have been the most simple thing. That's the only explanation.
No, actually it wasn't that simple, but it was a me mistake.
Oh. Yeah, those ones hurt.
I gotta get this on camera real quick. So ABCS on the left side is now at 53 degrees and on the right side is at 0. So that's where my issue is definitely that OCV on the intake side on the left side, and it's an electrical issue. So now we got another fault to figure out. Well, we freaking did it. Finally. Oh man, I don't know why I never tested this before. Actually, I do know why I never tested it before. Because I built my freaking wiring harness the way that the factory diagram told me to. What the hell, Subaru engineers? It was backwards. Unless that's all Data's fault, because that's the program that I got the diagram off of. But it said it was an OEM diagram. I don't know. Doesn't matter anymore. I figured it out. So now, since that was just my temporary setup to make sure that that fixed the problem, I gotta actually take those wires out. I gotta take my entire harness out, delume it, take all the tape off the inside, and figure out where I messed up soldering those wires or pinning them into that main harness when I built the harness. And while I have the entire harness out, I'm gonna check all the wires for that driver's side OCV connector up top, because that is the one that controls the oil flow to the upper AVCS gear. So there's something going on with that oil control valve there. And honestly, I'm not too worried about it, because now I have a problem that is actually giving me a code that I can actually chase down. Whereas the other one was just giving me a generic P0301. It didn't give me a circuit failure issue. It was just an intermittent misfire. But now we finally freaking found it. I am so happy right now. I don't even care about that OCV issue. It's giving me something I can duplicate on the access port. I can see the AVCS values are off. And like I said before, I know it's a circuit issue because it says circuit low. So it's clearly a wiring issue in my harness. This video is already probably long and boring enough. So that's probably where I'm going to end this video. In the next video, we will actually fix the issue and take it out for a rip, give her all the beans on the road, and make sure that this thing is 110% dialed now, electrically speaking. We still got that exhaust leak and a couple other things to tidy up, but we made some good progress tonight, and I'm happy. So that's gonna be it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching and sticking along with me on this freaking misfire issue I've been trying to figure out forever. I can't even talk anymore. So yeah, peace out, you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Like I said, again, I can't wait to take this thing to the track and actually rip it when it's not misfiring. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.